This week on One Day Leader, we hypothesize a completely different post-apartheid South Africa as we ask ourselves if democracy was the best route to take. Sanibonani babukele makhaya and a warm welcome to One Day Leader Season 8 khona la ku SABC 1 igama nginguPearl Shongwe. Now even though things are quite different, I'm sure that you're just as happy as we are to be back on your screens and continuing the journey of finding this season's ultimate One Day Leader. Babukeli, this is our third week back after that sudden hiatus that a worldwide pandemic forced us into. Though we are not in the clear as citizens, we do of course need to continue adhering to the rules and play our part in flattening the curve. Over the past few weeks, our country has been under very strict lockdown regulations that have limited a lot of our freedoms as citizens. As uncomfortable as it has been, the lockdown has not only helped us reduce the number of infections, but it's also drastically reduced the rate of various heinous crimes. We've seen how trauma units and hospitals have not been overflowing for the first time in years. Was democracy the best form of governance for South Africa after the eradication of apartheid? It's certainly not an easy question to answer, but I know our leaders will not shy away from engaging fully in tonight's debate. Of course, you at home can join the conversation by visiting our social media pages. We are on Twitter and Instagram. Simply search at One Day Leader. And of course, our Facebook page is One Day Leader Season 8. Leaders, we hope you are ready to give your contributions, and we're certainly looking forward to hearing what you've got to say tonight. But before we get into all of that, let's hear your vision statements.
I am an African who is reminded today that this land was not a gift unto me from our forefathers and our ancestors, but it was given unto us by our children so that we may return it to them in generations to come with a better African identity. South Africa, we've been living the blame game of blaming the older generation, not taking the full responsibilities of what we have today so that we improve it. However, I plead with you, South Africa, that you kindly join me in building an Africa centered in Afrocentrism. Mayihlome ma-Afrika, phambili, masivuke.
Thank you very much, Leader 2. Leader 3, it's your turn. Good evening.
I am on a mission to establish contact beyond the grave with the heroes of our past, to assure them that their struggle was not in vain, but most importantly, to remind you and I that our voices did not get drowned by the echoes of our forefathers from the bullets of the colonialists. Africa is not poor. Africa is being robbed by our silence, apathy, and neutrality. For socio-economic transformation, South Africa needs a new type of citizen, a catalyst for change, a surgeon for humanity, and an advocate for Africanism. If not you and I, then who? And if not now, then when?
Thank you very much, Leader 3. Good evening to you, Leader 4. Your vision statement, please.
The Soweto uprising of 1976 displayed to us young people who did not allow adversity to dampen their spirits. I am inspired by this, and I advocate for a transformative education movement which teaches the marginalized that they can rise above their circumstances.
Thank you very much, Leader 4. Good evening, Leader 5. Your vision statement, please.
The creation of a peaceful and prosperous society that includes all people of all races, regardless of gender and transcending sexual orientation, is the development of citizens with a sociological understanding for their societies so that they can meaningfully contribute to them, restoring prosperity and promoting the cause of peace for all. South Africa, I am the one you've been waiting for.
Thank you very much, Leader 5. And lastly, Leader 6, good evening. It's your turn.
My voice, my mind, my life. 3 things I will use to fight for those whose suffering has been silenced. Youth hindered by a lackluster education system. Women under siege by the patriarchy, from the gender pay gap to gender-based violence. Queer bodies systemically excluded from all sectors of society. The 99% who've been repeatedly failed by the state. And Black Africans who continue to live under the dictatorship that is the legacy of apartheid. South Africa, I give you my voice, my mind, my life.
Thank you very much to all of you leaders. South Africa, you've heard their vision statements once again. Let us know what you think on our social media platforms. Now, it's time for us to take a look at the scoreboard. I know a lot of you have been anxious to see where your favorite currently sits. Last week, we said goodbye to Lindo Guhle Mabaso. Tobani is at 5 points, Zizipo at 8 points, Zanele 4 points, Vusi and Pearl are sitting at 10 and 11 points respectively. All right, we've just seen the scoreboard, and yes, it is quite tight at the bottom, but the slightest change can result in any of our leaders going home there. I hope you guys brought your A game tonight, and I have no doubt that you have. Let's start off with our guest judge. She's a member of the advisory board of the Council of the Advancement of the South African Constitution. She's also a member of the Johannesburg and the New York Bar. Please welcome Advocate Michelle Leroux. Allow me to also welcome our resident judges. They are Gugulethu Mhlungu, who has over 10 years experience in media and was the winner of the 2015 Columnist of the Year at the Legends Media Awards, and Ndumiso Hadebe, who's a One Day Leader alumni who won season 2 of this very show. He's an economist by profession and an entrepreneur. We're going to turn to our guest judge, Michelle. Democracy, was that the best way for South Africa, considering everything that we had gone through in the past?
Well, what I'm interested in hearing today is what the alternatives were.
Yeah.
Because certainly we had an autocratic system under apartheid. We had a security state. And what we did is we dismantled that and put in place a constitution that is the envy of the world. Obviously, it hasn't changed enough for the lives of most South Africans. And that's the debate for me, I think.
Thank you very much. Ndumiso, as a previous contestant of this very show, how would you tackle this question? It's so big.
It's quite a big question. You're quite correct. I think the premise of any argument that should be based here today should be based on particular principles that are linked to human rights across the board. So the importance of self-determination, of peace and security and prosperity of peoples. And then I think from that vantage point, we can actually see what kind or form of government brings us closer to that kind of scenario. So I would tackle it from that perspective.
All right. Is it those basic human rights, or is it a thriving economy? It's also a discussion that's raging on right now amid this COVID pandemic.
Well, you can't have one without the other. You cannot have a thriving economy without a healthy population. The economy is its people. And I think it says something that people have to choose one or the other. You can either have your health or you can work. A few years ago, former Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan said, maybe it's time for South Africa to add an economic charter to the Bill of Rights. Because there is this idea that if you are to sell your labor, if you're going to live, that you must expect that you will lose some of your other rights. But that's not correct. To live is not to choose, you shouldn't have to choose death to put food on the table, and it shouldn't be the other way around. Your fortunes, your chances of living shouldn't be tied to your economic status or your class or your access to money. So again, the idea that we think we must choose one or the other tells us something is very broken.
All right. Thank you very much, judges. Interesting topic tonight. And of course, you're more than welcome to engage on it as well. We are on our social media platforms. Make sure that you get in your comments as well as your opinions. We love to hear from you. Not an easy journey that we've had to walk as a country. And we are still walking that journey. And hopefully we'll get to where we want to get to with all the sacrifices that have been made. It is only right that we do good by South Africa. After the break, we are going to find out what our contestants have to say for themselves tonight. It's going to be exciting debates. One Day Leader khona la ku SABC 1. Namhlanje we seek to answer the question of whether democracy was the best form of governance for South Africa after apartheid. Now, before the break, we heard some insights from our judges, and yes, we certainly will go deeper into this discussion as our contestants today tackle this issue in their debates. Now, some of you, ngingasho mhlawumbe ukuthi ama 2000 might not be too familiar or might have been too young to experience this, but I mean, the road to democracy was not an easy one. We've read about it. We've seen it in documentaries and in a lot of our history books. And honestly, it was not what everyone wanted. Yet, it's what we had to go through as a country. Let's quickly take a look into the past, just for 2000. 1948 birthed one of the most oppressive systems of governance that the world has ever seen. apartheid. This carefully constructed system went out of its way to further separate South Africans along racial lines. This meant that black people, who were in the majority, had to succumb to the rule of the white minority. From subpar education, limitations in movement, and the military rule, the lives of non-whites, as they were classified at the time, became increasingly unbearable. These atrocities forced the oppressed to fight back. This fight for freedom and equality was far from an easy one. Many lives were lost, entire families were displaced, and some freedom fighters spent decades of their lives in prison simply because they were fighting for basic human rights. The fight went on for decades, but eventually the high walls of apartheid slowly came crumbling down.
I wish to put it plainly that the government has taken a firm decision to release Mr. Mandela unconditionally.
The beginning of the 1990s came the dawn of a new era. An era where black people would not only get a seat at the table, but their voices would finally be heard. The birth of a democratic South Africa came with many sacrifices, compromises, and negotiations which didn't sit well with everyone. There was much fear that these peace efforts would have been futile and South Africa would be plunged into a bloody civil war, all for liberation. The Convention for Democratic South Africa, or CODESA, allowed for multi-party discussions to take place that would shape what South Africa's economic constitution would look like, how elections would take place, and various other crucial elements that would make up this new South Africa. On the 27th of April 1994, South Africa held its very first democratic elections where all eligible citizens could vote. Finally, the people had a say on who would lead them. Much has happened over this quarter of a century, yet for many, not much has changed. High levels of poverty and unemployment are still the order of the day, and this beautiful new South Africa, with one of the world's best constitutions, is considered one of the most unequal nations in the world. High rates of brutal crime, femicide, and various social ills which disproportionately affect majority races. Could it be that South Africa's new dawn could have actually been the birth of a new darkness? If one could change the hands of time, just maybe, a better South Africa could have been born. Thank you very much to our partners, the NYDA, for continuing to uplift and develop the youth of Mzansi. The fastest growing economies in the world subscribe to some form of communism. Under this system, China has become a force to be reckoned with across the globe. Like most communist states, the country has free world-class healthcare, quality and affordable public transport, amongst many others. Those are just some of the benefits of these communist states. The existence of these states show that there were other options available even to us South Africans after the end of apartheid. We're going to get into these debates and see what other options our contestants are going to come up with, or are they simply happy with democracy, and what does democracy have to offer for all South Africans? Before we get into all of that, let's remind you that one or more of our leaders could be packing their bags and heading home tonight. Leaders, have you done enough to keep yourselves in the game? Have you done enough to earn South Africa's votes? Have you done enough to make sure that your thoughts, your solutions are heard? All right, we've been waiting for these heated debates that we're expecting tonight, and I hope our contestants are ready. Our first debate will be between Leader 2 and Leader 3. Leader 3, I'll give you your time first.
1994 was not a democratic breakthrough, but the issue isn't democracy. It is the non-democratic design models that exist within democracy. Therefore, we need to reinvent democracy. It needs to be reinvented to cultivate a shared and commonly implementable framework of policy reform to enable sustainable development by directing or redistributing productive resources to the African majority at the bottom of the food chain to allow them to participate in socio-economic development. We need to revamp state and cadre deployment structures of bureaucracy and introduce a new system of recruitment, appointment and rewarding of bureaucrats. The distribution of income is principally determined by the distribution of wealth. And so what we need to do is intervention. And this principal intervention must address wealth and productive asset redistribution. There's also a link between colonial education and the failure of development policies in Africa, as colonial education systems were designed as instruments of co-opting elites to the colonial project, and therefore we need to decolonize
Time's
our
up, leaders.
education
You have
system.
90 seconds
we
to
also
engage.
need to transform the constitution and make sure that it addresses political subjugation of African people, such as the land disposition. Yes.
Okay, just two quick questions. You're saying that you want to redistribute the world to the majority, which is most likely the black people. How are you going to take the world from the elite whites and also those gatekeepers who are busy running our country? And you say you also like to decolonize the education. How are you going to do that? Because we've had long strikes trying to do that.
So I'm not saying take anything from anyone and give anyone anything. I'm simply saying that, okay, let's look at statistics, for example. They don't even give us an accurate depiction of our reality. But if you evaluate the economy around us, the poverty around us, and inequality, you realize that we don't address this painted narrative about democracy. The healthcare system is split between a private sector that is only serving white minority and an under-resourced public sector that is serving majority. So apartheid didn't die. It just became a decentralized network that exists in our schools and in the public sector. So what we need to do is policy framework that addresses those issues.
Point.
Yes.
You're telling us that we need to carry out policies that are going to directly address these issues. But we know there's already gatekeepers like Jeff Rateb who have been in parliament since 1994, and they are still there. So these are the people that are going to carry out this.
And that's why I gave you an entire policy about revamping state.
Who is going to do it? That's my question. Because if you're relying on the current government, Ramaphosa was in the Codesa negotiations.
So what are you
He's still there.
suggesting?
How is he going to do anything?
Time's up. Thank you very much. Zizipo, you have 30 seconds to close.
What I'm saying is that there are too many illusions about the prospect of democracy in South Africa. Political participation and political equality in relation to democracy is equivalent to economic participation and economic equality, and that's where the disconnect is. Democracy in its primary meaning is simply rule by people, and this is what must be approximated mainly by its reintervention. Without this, there can be no socio-economic transformation and emancipation.
Thank you very much. Your time is up. We're going to turn the tables now. Leader 2, you have 60 seconds.
Is South Africa truly a democratic state, or is it a kleptocrat? There's a difference between the two, even though they might seem the same. I'll tell you later what makes a country to be a democratic state and what makes us to be a kleptocratic democracy. What's a kleptocratic democracy? It's a kleptocratic democracy. It is whereby the leadership whom are in power, they use corruption, exploitation of national resources so that they can advance their own personal wealth. How do we find that happening in South Africa? State capture is the first point of departure. Secondly, endless corruption commissions of inquiry. Thirdly, we're speaking about 1.5 trillion which has been used in the past 10 years to cover up for government's corruption in the state. And third but not least, each and every year in South Africa, third part of the taxes are lost due to corruption and misconduct taxes in our state. So what happens when we speak about democracy? Democracy is a means to an end of an injustice, not an end to itself for the beginning of an injustice, which is what is happening to South Africa currently right now. It is an ending in itself, and we are seeing that injustice and corruption.
Time is up. Remember, leaders, to answer the topic of discussion. You have 60 seconds.
Just a sec.
Okay, yes.
Now, what makes a country to be a key democratic state? You need to have 4 points that are happening.
You agree that we need to reinvent democracy? You're not introducing an entire new system.
I'm just telling you, we're not a democratic state. We just have it in paper, in black and white. We need to enforce and ensuring that we are truly a democratic state. How then do we go about doing this? One, we need a dominant governance in our state. What do you speak about dominant governance? You need to have a parliament which is sovereign from any political activities that are there. You need to also have a judicial independence. How do we not find this existing in our state?
Can you please engage? Okay, let's look at the concept of wealth condensation, for example. Now, newly created wealth invariably concentrates in the position of people who are already wealthy. And we will see the implications of this post-COVID-19. How does your policy address such issues?
Can I please engage? You are telling us that we need to readdress the issue of wealth. Yes, I agree on
no,
addressing
I'm not saying readdress. I'm saying how does the motion you're posing address the concept of wealth condensation? Because those are the issues that are driving democracy to be faulty, and you're not speaking to that. You're just reiterating how flawed the system is, but you're not giving us anything tangible.
What I'm trying to say in my policy, if you're speaking about wealth being redistributed to the people that are already on the ground, as I was posing a question to her, that how do you then begin this redistribution? Because we know
time is up. Thank you very much, Leader 2. You can wrap in 30 seconds.
These gatekeepers are the ones that are benefiting the most. How do we do about this? If we're having a dominant governance and limitation of lawmakers' rights for them to have their own rights. In South Africa, we used to have what was called Scorpions, but it does not exist anymore. Scorpions was part of what was existing as an agency to ensure that our gatekeepers, they are truly at the back foot. In America, you know there's FBI. You also know that there's Senate and FBI. They are there to ensure that the constitutions and the gatekeepers of whatever they're gatekeeping there, themselves who may have been there.
Time is up. Thank you very much, leaders. That was our first debate, done and dusted. Just a quick reminder or refresher of the rules of engagement here. Engage respectfully, and remember, the top rule of them all is to address the topic. And we're going to find out if you did just that there with Googs. I'd like to get your thoughts, please, on that first debate.
I think quite an interesting start to the evening. I'm glad that we managed to get away from some of, because I think the question is quite broad. And what I'm quite happy about this first debate is our leaders managed to kind of really get into the question to say, what are we really asking? Is it really a question about the system of governance? Or are we trying to make an assessment of perhaps what hasn't delivered what we expected, the very audacious, the very bold vision we have for ourselves. And I'm glad that our leaders really got into some of those details, looking at some of the socioeconomic structural issues that are making perhaps democracy not deliver in the way we know it can, in the way we hope it can, how we can fully then say, we've tried everything, we've really tried this democracy thing, and this is, how far we've gone. So I'm really glad that they got into kind of the nitty-gritty. I would have liked a little bit more time on some of their solutions. Again, we play a very limited, in terms of time. So I understand the kind of limit on their time to get into their solutions, but I kept, wanting to hear a little bit more.
All right, thank you very much, Googs. I'm going to give the judges a moment to deliberate and get in their score so they can get us that verdict. But our first debate is done and dusted. Now it's up to you at home to please let us know what you thought about that debate. Of course, it was between Leader 2 and Leader 3. Ndumiso?
Leader 3.
Leader 3. Congratulations to you, Zizi, for securing yourself a point. Now the first debate is out of the way. Join us after the break as we get into another round of heated debates. See you after this. Thank you so much for staying with us. Konalagu one-day leader Igama Pearl Shongwe. We continue on tonight's journey to find out if in its eradication of the apartheid system, was democracy the best form of governance for our country? Well, this is what our leaders are debating tonight. Our next debate will be between Leader 4 and Leader 5. Leader 5, your 60 seconds start now.
The Human Development Index states that economic and social transformation is contextually determined by political systems. Therefore, governance is not universal, it is contextual. Tonight, we are putting the spotlight on democracy because the strategic sectors of the economy do not represent the broad demographics of the population. This has led to 55% poverty, 29% unemployment, affecting mostly the black majority, leading us to becoming the most unequal society in the world. However, let us remember that South Africa's transition took place within a global context. We must understand the moment, the politics of time and space, in order to make sense of the governance options that were available to us at that time. Having said that, between 1989 and 1991, the Cold War ended and the leader of communism, the former USSR, disintegrated. I emphasize this particular form of governance because it is the closest alternative form of governance that we could have selected. So under those circumstances, it's not a matter of whether or not democracy was the best form of governance. We had no choice. The mistake that we did was to select a liberal democracy instead of social democracy.
All right, you still had time there, but you're wasting your seconds. I'll let you guys engage.
Okay. The problem with liberal...
Can we please have clarity here on liberal
The
versus
problem with
social?
liberal democracy is that it governs on the basis of equality instead of equity. We could not expect that after 40 ages of apartheid and hundreds of years of colonialism, that suddenly people would now be equal. Social democracy is based...
Any democracy or any economic political system is still subject to human inequities. So even though we could have a social democracy, that would have still been subject to the greed of capitalistic leaders in our economy. So how do you think that could have been addressed in that state?
Social democracy advocates for economic and social interventions to promote social justice within the liberal democratic polity and a capitalist-oriented
Those are not very
economy.
different goals
Let me
we
tell
have
you what
from
I'm
now.
saying. Yeah. Why this is important is because South Africa's transition took place at the height of neoliberal economics. So social democracy is a fine line between socialism and liberalism. Why this is important is because the new dispensation government inherited a contradictory state. The most developed economy on the African continent on one hand, and the most unequal society on the other. So this would be able, social democrats would be able to have greater egalitarian and solidaristic outcomes in a society while enhancing economic growth through regulating the dynamism of...
So what is the way forward? Do we now go for a social democracy?
Yes, that's what I'm essentially saying. To say we must move from liberal democracy to social democracy. This is because social democracy is a viable alternative path to development. A strong central government guiding the society through distinct stages of development until it reaches two things: industrialization and social
Thank
justice.
you very much. Leader 5, you can wrap it up in 30 seconds.
Liberal democracy in South Africa exacerbated apartheid inequalities because the equality of opportunity is meaningless without the equalization of outcomes. Otherwise, the former solidifies into the very system of undeserved advantage and disadvantage that it was meant to correct. The Asian tigers in East Asia still stand as an example of states that have achieved social and economic development through social democracy. What makes this practical is because social democracy does not divorce social transformation from economic development. That's what makes this argument practical.
Thank you very much. Time is up. Leader 4, it is your turn. Your 60 seconds start now.
Social democracy, liberal democracy, still democracy. The fact is, these democracies still have to be implemented and driven by human beings who sometimes succumb to vices such as corruption, such as greed and self-interest. It means that we need to safeguard principles that make any type of democracy to thrive anyway. And in addition to this, we need to couple this democracy with economic reform. Our mothers and grandmothers today complain not because they don't want a democracy inherently, but because there is lack of accountability and there is economic exclusion that they experience in terms of how they are enjoying the benefits of the democracy that they voted for. The problem is not the type of democracy that we have, but the problem is how we have neglected the principles of democracy inherently, such as accountability, such as equality, such as the ability to hold our leaders accountable and ask them where are the goods that they have promised to deliver. And most importantly, it is the economic exclusion that individuals from marginalized groups still experience today. We want economic reform because political freedom without economic freedom is in vain. As a black person today, it is good to go on
Thank you very much. Time's up, Leader 4. You have 90 seconds to engage.
It is an expression that we get to go and vote, but the reality is you are voting for land that is still owned by the white minority. You are voting for companies and corporates that are white and are driven by such minorities, which is problematic, and it means that even if we implement a social democracy, the type of economic reform that we need still is necessary.
No, firstly, there's difference between liberal democracy and social democracy. Why I'm saying this is because the RDP was abandoned after 2 years because it was driven by neoliberal policies. It was given 2% of the national budget, and all the socio-economic transformation programs that have been implemented currently ignore the generation of new taxes so that they can broaden government's tax base so that they can adequately transform society. So you cannot say liberal democracy and social democracy are the same. And secondly, what is your solution? You are giving us the problem. What form of governance are you saying?
My solution is keeping democracy but ensuring economic reform, because the reality is democracy is not does not exist in a vacuum of human vices, as I'm saying, such as greed and corruption, which can still occur under a social democracy. The reality is we need to reform our economy in such a way that it can survive regardless of greedy and corrupt officers that exist that need to fulfill our needs and wants. The reality is that we have many states. Just last point. We have many state capture reports that have just ended on investigations. There is no way forward that holds accountable our leaders, and this would be a problem that we experience still under a social democracy.
Those are populist rhetorics. I do advocate for that. How do you implement those things? Because we've got the gear, we've got the RDP.
Thank you very much, leaders. Time is up. Leader 4, you have the remaining 30 seconds to wrap up your point.
Redistribute the land. Privatize state-owned companies that are failing and are being looted by our officers currently. It is important to note that we need economic reform to drive any type of democratic principle that we have. Because the reality is, as I said, the people who voted in 1994 are not regretting the nature of a democracy, but the fact that there is lack of accountability and there's continued economic exclusion inclusion that exists for marginalized groups. And we need to be aware also that democracy does not exist in a vacuum. It is also subject to human imperfections, and therefore we need to try our best.
Time is up. Thank you very much. Wow, what a debate. Ndumiso, let me come to you for thoughts on that one.
It was quite interesting that Uvosi then raises the issue of liberal democracies and social democracies. And it would have been great perhaps if you cited examples of such in this particular instance with the equation of money in that context as well. Because the issue around democracy, and I think the other contestants cited prominent political individuals in this respect, oftentimes then the lack of service delivery and so on then translates into people questioning whether or not the form of governance system is an appropriate one or not.
Googs, the verdict for us?
Quite a spirited debate, but unanimously this one goes to Leader 5, we'll see.
All right, thank you very much and congratulations to you, Leader 5. All right, Belle, you are our final contestant and of course you are going to have an opportunity to choose which contestant you would like to debate against tonight because you are our leader on the scoreboard. Think very carefully about what you do.
I'd like to speak against Tobani.
All right, thank you very much. Tobani, I hope you are ready to go for another round. Val, your 60 seconds start now.
Democracy enshrines values such as freedom and civil rights. However, the form in which it was implemented post-apartheid South Africa lacked the necessary socialist policies to achieve change, transformation, and an equitable society. The best system of governance that we could have implemented was democratic socialism. Democratic socialism looks like property held by the public through a democratically elected government, but this is limited to productive property and significant infrastructure. It does not extend to personal property or even large corporations. Secondly, then, there's a limit on the accumulation of private property, government regulates the economy, and there's extensive and proactive welfare programs. 3 policies under democratic socialism that address inequality. Firstly, redistribution of capital and land via a progressive tax system and constitutional reform. Secondly, the ladder of opportunity needs to be created via public policy to address systematic inequalities. And this happens at 3 different levels. Firstly, dealing with children, right? We're looking at things like enrichment programs, bettering public schools, after-school and community activities, and apprenticeships. For university students, it's reforming...
Thank you, Leader 6. Time is up. You can engage.
It's reforming things like higher education fee structures and better support for TVETs in colleges. And finally, then for adults, it's things like opportunities for continuous training and upskilling. The third layer of this is inheritance tax on estates over a particular size to fund these various state projects. Tobani.
Understanding that on socialism, whoever is the leader is the one that dispensates whatever resources the state owns. Can you please describe to me what South Africa would have looked like when Jacob Zuma would have owned all the privilege and rights over the assets of the nation?
Okay, cool. So I think it's very important to note that under a system like democratic socialism, we have something called inclusive governance. This looks like the state, companies, civil society, the judicial branch of government, legal scholars facilitating national dialogues and developing and implementing educational programs to help citizens understand and appreciate the Constitution and its power in guaranteeing rights, organizing the lives of citizens and holding the government accountable and ensuring that it is inclusive and cultivates transformative leadership at all levels. So your example of the kind of corruption that we see under the Zuma years simply doesn't stand under this model. We need a slightly more aggressive push for economic equality without risking decreasing incentives for economic output. Sure.
You're saying that with your democratic socialism, we'll go around educating people about the democracy and the constitution and all of that. We understand that in South Africa, almost 15 million people are young people in South Africa. We're on a show called One Day Leader,
exactly.
which
so that kind of education can
but
take
still
place
stick
in a
to
classroom.
3 million people. So it means that roughly 12 million
Time is up. Thank you very much. We'll get to your closing statements now, Belle.
This model would have improved our international economic competitiveness, infrastructure, service delivery, lowered the cost of living, and addressed socioeconomic and political factors. Corruption and government ineffectivity coupled with poor standards of education have detracted investment and weakened our economy. Strong, democratic, socialist principles would have counteracted this through efficient institutions, responsible government policies, and a strong rule of law. My solutions not only prevent abuses of power, but celebrate human rights, protect, uplift, and empower.
Time is up. Thank you very much, leaders. Tobani, it is your turn.
I wish the latter speaker would have told us which country had effectively brought about this democratic socialism, so that I could easily critique it in its nature with a nation that has already failed. But now what happens if we look at South Africa? South Africa is a democratic state, but it seems that our democracy is failing at certain instances because of how it is being handled and because of how it is being conveyed unto us as a nation. Now this is what happens. Democracy, for it to be a state that is, for democracy to be a system that is going to be working effectively for people, it needs not to only have gatekeepers, but it also needs to have people that are enforcing that this democracy and this constitution, it is of effect in its own nature, in its own form. Now this is what happens. You need to have a limitation of whatever lawmakers are having. Decentralize power from government into different branches and different independent agencies, so that these agencies are able to interhold whatever government is doing in a state at that current instance. If we were to be honest with ourselves, we have a parliament that seeks to hold the government into being effective.
Time is up. Thank you very much, Leaders Engage.
When you have a parliament that is run by ANC to moderate whatever the ANC does in state, it means that there's going to be a greater problem. If you're going to have ministers that are coming from
Tabani, separation of powers still occurs.
Just a bit. If you're just going to be having ministers that come from a single state party, it means that the effectiveness of that party is not effective.
Engage with what a democratic socialist country looks like.
You have ANC being the minister and the deputy minister coming from any other different party, so that you have an inclusive and incorporated democracy that seeks to represent a majority of people.
Okay, firstly, on the Ukraine, that's an example of a developing country which has implemented these kinds of systems highly successfully. Secondly, then, you still get the Ukraine. Secondly, then, you still get separation of powers between the various branches of government, and you can still have multi-party dialogues and discourses. My model actually accounts to including minorities far better than the model. You're not even proposing a model. There's no comparative for me in this debate.
Okay. Let me just rectify this. Ukraine as a nation was absorbed. What happened? The Russians, they decided to absorb the system of the Ukrainians, because the Ukrainians, they were fighting amongst each other for the resources that they have in their own nation. They are the last country to have experienced a mass genocide from their own people within their own country. So that means that if you were going to have this democratic socialism in 1994, what was going to happen? There was going to be a greater bloodshed, because the white people, they were not going to easily just say.
Thank you very much. Time is up. Thank you, leaders. Leader 2, you have 30 seconds to wrap it up.
In my 30 seconds to wrap it up, as I just said, we need to have people that are ensuring that whatever system, which is our democracy, seeks to represent the majority of the people. How does it go about representing the majority of the people? Redistribute land. Let the land not to be owned by the minority group in our nation. Let the economy not be owned by just a secluded minority of the people in the state. Recently, we had Fees Must Fall, where the majority of people were complaining that they cannot afford the education that Bell speaks about. But even today, that education
Thank you very much. Your time is up. Thank you very, very much, leaders. I will give this one to Advocate LaRue to give us her thoughts and comments on that final debate. Quite heated. What are your thoughts, Advocate, please?
Well, first of all, the passion for both speakers was fantastic. I'm looking forward to one day when you are the leaders, so that we can.
This is the day.
So this will be what we get to see. What I liked about this debate was it had quite a narrow focus. So the examples that both of you were using were to a particular proposition, and so the debate got to ventilate. And I think that's why we saw the differences in your perspectives come through in how you were debating. So I think keeping that focus was what made this debate, I think, quite an exciting one, and got us to think through some of the questions with the examples you used, the practical responses you gave each other. So I thought as a debate, I'm not sure if you persuaded each other, but you certainly were engaging each other.
Good. This is tough work. This is really tough work.
Is it a tie?
Just,
not?
I think one of the most interesting debates we've had, and we were quite making the decision was quite difficult, but this vote went to Bell.
All right. Thank you very much. Congratulations, Leader 6. Do continue sending us your comments, as I mentioned earlier, on our social media pages. We are on Twitter and Instagram. Simply search at One Day Leader. And, of course, find us on Facebook, One Day Leader Season 8. After the break, we'll get some parting shots from our judges and find out which leader will be packing their bags and going home tonight. Ninga indawo siyabuya. Phindis namukele ku One Day Leader. Quite an interesting episode we've had namhlanje. We heard some very interesting solutions. Was democracy the best form of governance for South Africa after the eradication of apartheid? Well, that is a question that our leaders sought to answer tonight. And of course, we saw who walked away with their points in their respective debates. But somebody has to go home tonight. Let's hear from the judges if they were impressed about what they saw here tonight, and of course advice for our leaders going into our final 2 weeks. And Dumisa, I'll start with you.
Sure, I think it's funny when I have to give this feedback because I've been where these guys are before, and I can understand the emotions and the thought processes that they're currently undergoing. And so once again, my hope is that post this journey, I won't see your voices being limited to being on this platform alone. I wish that whoever might be going home, which is heartbreaking, that beyond this platform, that we'll be seeing your voices out there. We'll be seeing you actively making differences in your communities, and the very same positions that you hold right now, that they may evolve and that they may mature. So all of the best.
Thank you very much. And of course, you can always come back and be a judge on One Day Leader. Googs, your parting words?
So I think, again, I'm very impressed by the kind of thought you guys gave this topic. I really am impressed with the research, the nuance that you managed to bring out. I do think what's quite important is in preparing to respond, in preparing your engagement, is to ensure that you actually understand your opponent's position. It is critical that you listen to your opponent to ensure that you make the best use of your debate engagement. Just going forward, that would be my biggest piece of advice, is to listen very, very carefully, ensure you're responding to stuff that has actually been presented, unless you are raising an issue that you felt they should have raised. That's very, very different.
Thank you very much, Googs. And to you, Advocate, your final words to not only our contestants, but to all of us South Africans who love a democracy and who remain hopeful about our democracy.
What strikes me about all of the leaders in your debates is that you're all passionate about the kind of South Africa you want to live in. And you're all actually identifying the same type of challenges: accountability, transparency, the connection between our leaders and the people that they serve and the people that put them into those positions of leadership. So while there was a lot of passion and a lot of spirit today, I think you're actually at the same mind about what it is that you want for our future. And I think building on that in future debates is really important. Just one practical tip as an advocate, given how little time you guys have in these debates: tell the judges what your point is and then make it.
Thank you very much to all our judges. Let's have a look now at our scoreboard. All right, we've seen that leader 4 is sitting with 4 points on the scoreboard. Unfortunately, Zanele, that means that your journey with us here on One Day Leader comes to an end. What an incredible young woman you are. Let's quickly take a look at your journey with us this season.
As someone who has been a fan of the show from its conception, and I have seen contestants come to the competition with the hopes of winning and making an impact, I think it sucks that I can't get to that position, that triumphant moment of being the season's winner. But what I've learned in my journey as a One Day Leader contestant is that leadership, first of all, is a lifelong commitment. I live to see the day where a black child does not have to sell their soul to secure their next meal, where mothers do not have to pay for a roof over their child's head by enduring more scars and bruises. To fellow compatriots, okay, sorry. To everyone at home, to my fellow South Africans, to everyone who supported me in this journey by sending messages, phone calls, comments, by stopping me on campus or at the mall and saying, "Are you leader 4?" By saying "Zizojika izinto" when you see me or when you text me or when you comment. Ngiyabonga kakhulu. So I would like you to remember me as an advocate for education, an advocate for people who come from perceivably lower classes of society, and as a result, as people abangafanelwe into ethize. I think there is importance in okay. Ngiyandithanda South Africa, nisale kahle, leader 4, zizojika izinto.
Thank you very much, Zanele, for your light and just your incredible presence on the show. You've done a phenomenal job and we wish you all the best. What an emotional clip. I don't even know why I'm shedding a tear. It's always like this when we have to say goodbye to one of our contestants, but we have no doubt that the leaders that have been with us this season will go on to do incredible things for our country. That is where we'll leave it for today. Unfortunately, we know that you guys cannot vote for your favorite at home, so keep rooting for them on social media and spurring them on, making sure that they keep with the energy of wanting to be triumphant. Now, join us next week as we get into another debate. Of course, it's going to be interesting because we'll be getting into, our semi-final. And we don't know which leader will ultimately be crowned. I leave you with these words from the late American author Frank Herbert, who wrote, "Good governance never depends upon laws, but upon the personal qualities of those who govern. The most important element of government, therefore, is the method of choosing leaders." Mzansi, let us all keep that in mind. It's a wrap from all of us here on One Day Leader and myself, Upel Shongwe. Let's meet again next week. Good night.